Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to another video on my channel, Hairliciously. If you guys are new to the channel, please make sure to hit that subscribe button so you guys are updated on hair loss and hair transplant topics. Visit my website at HAIRLICIOUSLY.com to purchase your microneedling devices, which are scientifically proven to stimulate hair growth. My low-level lace therapy cap, DHT blocking shampoo and serum, hair growth vitamins, and a few other products for those who are losing hair. So I apologize, guys. It's been a while since I've last updated. I try to push maybe like 2-3 videos a week, but I was actually in New York getting my SMP license. As you guys know, I talked about Skype micropigmentation a few times throughout my videos, and I think it's a great alternative for those who may not be a good candidate to a hair transplant, or simply, maybe you don't want to take hair loss medication and you just kind of want to go for the shaved look but with a full density. But I think it's a great alternative, and I'll probably talk about this in a later video. But in today's video, I finally wanted to give you guys an update on Dr. Tsuji and his research. A few weeks ago, as you guys know, I contacted Rogaine to see if I can get a hold of Dr. Tsuji to conduct an interview with him. And there's been a lot of questions everyone had in terms of his human clinical trials for hair multiplication, and I thought that it would be a great opportunity to try to get some much needed answers. I unfortunately was not able to secure a face-to-face interview due to his busy schedule and language barriers, but I was able to get the opportunity to email Dr. Tsuji directly with a list of questions that I had, as well as the questions some of my viewers presented to me. So finally, Dr. Tsuji responded back with the answers that we've actually been looking really forward to. So without further ado, let's just go and jump right into it. So the first question was, when exactly are the human clinical trials going to commence? How soon is it going to commence after the $4.8 million has been obtained? Dr. Tsuji's response was the following: the $4.8 million will be used toward a wide range of basic research in area of organ regeneration within Rogaine. To perform the clinical study of the hair follicle regeneration therapy, we must find competent partners, for example, contract research organization and the clinical institute, as well as obtain investment of around $8 to $10 million with them. After funding is secured, the clinical study will be able to start within a year at the earliest. So I actually mentioned this in a previous video on Dr. Tsuji. The $4.8 million is not going to go straight to hair multiplication, but also to other fields of research. And by the sound of Dr. Tsuji and his answer, they need to really secure a contract with a partnership to actually start commencing human clinical trials. And on top of that, we now know that they need an investment of $8 to $10 million with the partnership. So honestly, in my opinion, this is going to be their main priority. After, Organ Technologies went bankrupt and split up with Rogaine, Coursera, Dr. Tsuji needs to find a new player that can provide the financial requirements. So it looks like even with the initial $4.8 million acquired, eventually, through private donations and other external sources, it doesn't seem like it'll do much to accelerate human clinical trials, because they really need to find that golden partnership to really get the ball rolling. And until then, we can't really expect the human clinical trials to even, commence or take place. So hopefully we can get some big players to merge with Dr. Tsuji so that the damn human clinical trials that we've been really looking forward to can start. I'm honestly a bit disappointed to say the least, because when they actually gave us an update in early February this year, indirectly soliciting for donations, they kind of made it sound like human clinical trials would commence after obtaining the $4.8 million. But realistically, they do need someone to back them up, given that most of the research in Japan is government funded, and they really need a strong backbone to support them through all aspects of the research. Allergan would have really been a perfect match, but they already partnered up with Stemson Therapeutics. So, that's that. So the only thing we can really do is keep our fingers crossed, and hopefully that they can find a partnership, with another big player, whether it's in the US or, Japan. It sucks, but you do need money to get things going, and without it, there's not much that you can do. Question 2, how long the human clinical trials will commence for? We already know that Japan has an expedited pathway program for stem cell research, which would include human hair follicle multiplication. So figuring out how many human clinical trials that would be required, how many patients would be involved, and how long each trial would take before commercialization. If we can get an estimate of how long the process would take from start to finish for provisional approval, we can get a better time frame of when to expect this in the market. So Dr. Tsuji responded by the following: our plan is to start the clinical study for hair regeneration targeting patients of androgenetic alopecia. The number of the patients will likely be around 10, and the study period is for 1 year. If the initial clinical study demonstrates the safety and efficacy of the eruption of the bioengineered hair, then the marketing of this therapy will hopefully start around 2024. I'm also a little bit disappointed in this because they're only thinking of 10 patients to run human clinical trials on. Something, I think at least like 100 or so would be a much better study population, given that if they were to secure $10 million, they should definitely be using more patients. But at least we know that it's going to be at least, around 10 people, and that if all goes well, we can maybe expect something in 2024. I'm sure there's a lot of reasons financially at the very least that they're restricting the study to around 10 patients. Remember that this is going to be the best case scenario with absolutely no hiccups and assuming that the implanted stem cells actually regrow hair in human models. While it's not going to be impossible, I think that it just isn't going to be a likely scenario that we can expect this in the market in the next 3 years. And as you guys know, every human clinical trial comes across things that they need to overcome. There's always something that is going to slow it down, unfortunately. So realistically, I think that we're looking more closer towards 2026 to 2030, assuming that all of their plan goes as planned. Question 3, cost of the procedure. We were informed last year from the Japanese YouTuber Youngjit, who had attended some conferences with Dr. Tsuji, that the average cost of the procedure would be anywhere from $180,000 to $380,000 USD. This was through unconfirmed sources, so finding out the exact cost and what would actually constitute the price would be something worth knowing. Finding out how long it would take to get the price down. Now, the answer to this was also pretty depressing to hear. According to Dr. Tsuji, the estimated market prices that will be charged to customers for the solution at various stages of commercial scales are described below. Clinical trial stage, 60 through 80 million yen, which is approximately $551,000 to $735,000 USD per patient. This is for 1 to 100 patients. Commercial launch stage, which would be 30 to 40 million yen, approximately $276,000 to $368,000 USD per patient. And this is for 100 to 1,000 patients. Commercial stage, 20 to 30 million yen, approximately 184,000 to 276,000 USD per patient, up to 10,000 patients. And lastly, maturity stage, 15 to 20 million yen, approximately $138,000 to $184,000 USD per patient. And this is for once they obtain over 10,000 patients. So what this is saying is towards commercialization, once everything has been completed as far as human clinical trials, they've actually gone through all of the studies, efficacy and safety. It's still going to be costing in the mid to high 6-figure range, and hopefully the price continues to go down as more and more patients receive treatment. The pricing was pretty close to what Youngjit had initially mentioned. It's still pretty expensive. It's cost prohibitive and unobtainable for most people, but we now know the price range of what we can expect. Now, I'm not really sure what they mean by clinical trial stage, but I'm guessing it's for people who are interested in receiving the treatment during the clinical trial stage. It sounds a little bit iffy because this means nothing has really been proven yet. And I guess if you're really that desperate and can afford $500,000 to $750,000, you'll be able to receive the said treatment. I'm not exactly sure what they mean by the initial treatment, clinical stage or whatever. I really do see this coming down to even the 5-figure range after a few years as it becomes more readily available and accessible to individuals in various clinical settings. It should still be expensive, but obtainable for the average Joe. The fourth question pertains to the specific hair characteristics that would carry over from the epithelial and mesenchymal stem cells that are cultured from the hair follicle from the back of their donor zone. Would the newly created cells take on the same characteristics as the donor hair, including color, meaning if they are genetically programmed to be afflicted with androgenic alopecia, would the newly cultured hair follicle stem cells be resistant to DHT and the effects of androgens, or would they still be susceptible to miniaturization? Would people who have DUPA or retrograde alopecia still be good candidates? I think it's important to get Dr. Tsuji's perspective and how he specifically determines which grafts to extract for stem cell culturing, because even hairs in the donor zone can be prone to miniaturization, so it would be interesting to find out what he thinks of this. Basically finding out if the hairs will inherit the damage of or characteristics of donor hair, or if they'll be considered new embryonic hair. So here's his response. The character of hair type and androgenic alopecia follicle are dependent on the species of derma papilla cells. The back scalp skin derived hair follicle does not express 5-alpha reductase, an enzyme which has been implicated in the onset of androgenic alopecia. Therefore, the bioengineered hair follicle regenerated from the back scalp skin derived cells cannot induce androgenic alopecia even if the bioengineered hair follicle gem is transplanted into the top scalp skin. Now, this answer was a little bit confusing as well because it really didn't fully answer my question. Even if the hairs in the so-called donor area is resistant to DHT or doesn't express 5-AR. Hairs, regardless of where they're located on the scalp, are going to still continue to miniaturize and thin out over time. This rate is obviously going to be dependent on your sensitivity to androgens, if it's, the frontal area or the mid scalp. And it's still going to, thin out just due to the overall aging process. But what I'm getting out of this is that there's no way to 100% know if the hairs extracted are the ones that are resistant to DHT. And even if the donor hairs that are replicated will resume the original characteristics, meaning that if the extracted hair stem cells were predisposed to slightly miniaturize over time, we can expect the bioengineered hair follicles to slightly miniaturize over time as well. I think what he's trying to say is that the hairs in the back are typically DHT resistant, as we know, and it theoretically it's not going to miniaturize. That depends on exactly where the hairs are going to be extracted from, and this could pose a problem for those who do thin out and lose hair in the donor zone as well. And I don't think that there is really a test to check to see if certain hair follicles are resistant to DHT. This obviously shouldn't be an issue for most people because hair in the donor zone are typically not going to miniaturize. But I think it is something worth knowing. It is good to know that most people who do get the stem cells from the hair follicles from the back of the scalp from the donor zone are going to retain that same characteristic. Question 5, exactly what is the maximum density that can be achieved on the scalp per centimeter squared? Would someone who is a Nord 7 with full hair loss be able to obtain a full head of hair with adequate density through Dr. Tsuji's hair multiplication? How many sessions would be required to achieve full density? And would it look natural, just like someone who has never had a hair transplant? The obvious goal is a natural looking result. So finding out if the proper direction, angles, and all of that good stuff for the hair follicles will be controlled by natural cellular processes in the skin, or if it requires the doctor's intervention and specialized technique. So Dr. Tsuji's response is the density of the hair follicle in the humans is 60 to 100 hair shafts per centimeter squared. Severe hair loss patients, such as Nord 7, in which it is not possible to isolate their hair follicles, will need to perform the allogenic transplantations from HLA-matched donor-derived hair follicles. The clinical treatment is expected to involve 5 hours to transplant 10,000 hair follicles. Thus, if the patients want 50,000 hair shafts, it will require approximately 25 hours for the hair transplantation. So his answer was a little bit confusing as well, because as far as I know, hair transplants, at least hair transplants have to be autologous, meaning it has to come from the same person who is receiving the hair transplant. I'm not sure why they're saying that a Nord 7 is not able to isolate their hair follicles, because Nord 7 still tend to have at least somewhat of a good set of, hair in the back of the rim area, particularly the donor area where hair follicles can be extracted to isolate the stem cells and then multiply. But they're probably talking about worst case scenarios where people don't really have adequate density or hair on the donor zone to extract. Now, according to Rogaine, they were able to multiply the hair bulge-derived cells 4,000 times from one hair follicle, and dermal papilla cells were amplified in vitro about 100 times, meaning one hair follicle could generate 100 hair follicles. This means that basically 1,000 grafts extracted from the donor zone really shouldn't be an issue for most people. And it should technically, according to what they've been saying, should yield 100,000 hairs, which is about the average density on a non-modeling scalp. So theoretically, what they're saying is that it is possible to reverse a Nord 7 back to a Nord 1, but we also do know that not all of the 100% of the hairs are going to be regenerated. But he did state that allogeneic transplantation from HLA matched donor is possible through that, and it can be achieved, with adequate density to obtain a full set of hair. I feel like this still has a long way to come, at least the whole allogeneic aspect, since they haven't really specified on allogeneic transplantation in general. But this could obviously open up a lot of doors, especially for people who are really lacking donor hair. A person may be able to one day go to a hair clinic and receive transplantation of unlimited hair-inducing cells, which were already created in a lab without having to harvest the patient's own cells. This also resonates off of what Stemson Therapeutics once said about the possibility of allogeneic hair transplantation. But as far as I know, these are still speculations and still have yet to be tested and confirmed. But he did state that, 50,000 hairs will take about 25 hours. So, it is possible. It sounds like, they are still able to get 50,000 hairs or whatever amount. And he's correlating that with how many hours of time that it is going to take to harvest. So I think if everything goes as planned, we really do have a good chance of reversing somebody who is a Nord 7 back to a lower no-word chart, potentially no-word 1 or no-word 2. All right, moving on. Question 6 that I sent was, any hurdles and obstacles that Dr. Tsuji and his team might possibly encounter during their human clinical trials? Is there a possibility that this treatment may not work at all? So here's what he said. Previously, we demonstrated the fully functional hair follicle regeneration in the mouse model system. In general, it is thought that results seen in mouse experiments can be repeated in humans, but because the planned clinical study will be the first in human study, the actual efficacy of hair growth in the human scalp remains to be seen. Thus, at this time, we cannot fully predict how well the treatment will work. Now, I think with most clinical trials, I think translating this from mice models to humans is probably going to be one of the greatest challenges, because even if it works for mice or monkeys or whatever, animals, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work for humans. And if it doesn't work for humans, there's definitely going to be a lot of disappointment, because it basically means that they're going to have to go back to square one. Now, this obviously would be the worst case scenario and would ultimately put Dr. Tsuji and his team out of the hair multiplication game, unless they come up with something else that may potentially work. So, it's pretty much, I guess, all of their hard work and research might just go up in flames. Looking at previous companies, the outcome usually isn't too good. I always tell my viewers to be optimistically cautious and to expect nothing, because if you are betting your life on this and that it'll be able to, cure hair loss, you're going to be in for a lot of disappointment the moment that you find out that it doesn't work. Always stick with proven treatment and don't rely on something that isn't proven to work or isn't, efficacy isn't confirmed. I know guys who won't take medication despite suffering from hair loss because they're betting on Dr. Tsuji that they're going to be curing their no-word 6 or no-word 7 back to a no-word 1. And if you do this, you're really putting yourself at a disadvantage, because nothing is promised, and there's a high chance that this too, may not succeed. I'm not trying to be a pessimist. It's been decades since we actually came up with better treatment. We're still relying on minoxidil, finasteride, dutasteride, and it's been a long time since we've actually been able to transition, and we've actually just kind of been stagnant from back from like the 1990s, where we actually don't have any better treatments. So don't get your hopes up too much. And basically what he's saying is, we don't know, we don't know what's going to happen. We're hoping that mice models will translate into humans, but that's up to the human clinical trials, and we have to see what is actually going to happen. All right, question 7, possibility of mutations, particularly the chances of getting cancer from cellular replication. I think most of the cancer-related issues are mostly solved, but I don't think we ever received a direct response from Dr. Tsuji. Is there a possibility of cancer-inducing or faulty cell replication, which can be a part of STEM-based approaches? And if so, how they plan on overcoming this in human clinical trials? So Dr. Tsuji said that since these steps involve the cell proliferation step, it is possible that mutations can occur in the gene. However, preclinical safety studies using soft agar colonization assays showed that the proliferated cells did not form colonies, indicating that they are not tumorigenic. In addition, although it is not a method that is being considered as part of the hair follicle regeneration therapy, it is experimentally and biologically possible to carry out in the cell proliferation step when gene modification is required. Question 8. This pertains to the update we received last month on hair follicle cyclical regeneration from hair follicle stem cells. As we know, hair growth occurs in the anagen phase and hair falls out in the telogen phase. A successful hair regeneration treatment has to be able to produce hair that recycles and regenerates after each hair growth cycle. In their last update last time, they informed us that about 80% of hair follicles generated in the protein-specific bioengineered medium went through at least 3 hair cycles and produced normal hairs, whereas about 13% reached only 3 cycles when it was not present. So this makes me wonder if this treatment is going to be permanent and if it is going to need multiple treatments over a span of several years, because if about 20% did not generate at least 3% or at least 3 hair cycles, this means something is hindering the normal hair cycle and would need to be addressed fully in human clinical trials. Otherwise, the growth rate is dependent on something that Dr. Tsuji and his team has yet to figure out. So he said, previously, we clarified and demonstrated the fully functional hair follicle regeneration in the mouse model system. In mice, we observed that the bioengineered hair underwent repeated hair growth cycles during the lifespan of the mice. In general, it is thought that results seen in mice or mouse experiments can be repeated in humans, but we cannot fully predict the outcome of clinical studies in humans. So basically he's saying he doesn't know. Obviously, even mice models did not yield 100% hair cycles, and it is yet to be seen in human models. I think it's safe to say that even if it does translate to humans, we can't really assume 100% growth because mice models failed to reach that as well. So it's really up to the studies and see what really happens. Number 9, how are Dr. Tsuji and his team planning to make this available to a large number of people all across the world? How are they going to meet the demand? Will they license their technology in a clinical setting, such as in hair transplant clinics, so that this can be accessible to others? His response was, once results of the initial clinical study shows adequate safety and efficacy, we plan to make this available to hospitals and clinics that can perform this hair regeneration therapy, both in Japan and other countries. However, the hair transplantation technique requires a high level of skill. Therefore, we have to determine how to certify clinicians and physicians for this therapy. So guys, that's all the questions that I had sent to Dr. Tsuji and some of the questions that you guys wanted me to send out. And hopefully you guys have a better understanding. I know that some of the questions weren't really answers because it really depends on what's going to happen to the human clinical trials. But I think Dr. Tsuji did a good job of trying to answer all the questions that we had. And hopefully they do find a partnership sooner than later so that they can start human clinical trials and, just really see what commences. So if you guys have any questions, let me know in the comments below. If you like this type of video, make sure to reach out, leave me some comments. Make sure to give that thumbs up. And if you have any other questions that you want me to reach out to Dr. Tsuji, we can actually come up with another list. Or if you guys need any clarifications, we can go ahead and do that. But in the meantime, thanks for watching, guys, and I will talk to you guys in my next video. Take care.